Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the special council meeting of Monday, April 4th, 2022. Moved by Councillor Frost, seconded by Councillor Perrier. Be it resolved that the Township of Greater Madawaska calls to order the April 4th, 2022 special council meeting at 5:30 p.m. All in favor? That's carried. Moved by Councillor Frost, seconded by Councillor Perrier. Be it resolved that the agenda of the special council meeting of April 4, 2022 be approved as presented. All in favor? Carried. And tonight's public meeting, the purpose of the public meeting of council is being held under Section 12 of the Development Charges Act 1997 as amended. The purpose of the meeting is to give the public an opportunity to ask questions, provide comments, and make representation on the development charges background study. And I'll ask council, is there any declaration of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. And I'll ask Renee if you can introduce the first presenters.
So we have today presenting the development charge study. We have on Gary Scanlon from Watson Associates and Byron Tan. They are the consultants that were that assisted the township in developing or providing the review for development background study. Robin, do you have them set up to share? Robin will give you, hi Gary, hi Byron. Robin will give you access for you to be able to share your presentation.
Thank you, Renee. Byron it's a pleasure to be with council this evening. My colleague Byron will pull up the presentation. So once again, pleasure to be with you tonight. As the mayor's indicated, we'll be going through a public meeting, which is mandatory under the Development Charges Act if the municipality wishes to pass a bylaw. This generally is our agenda for this presentation. So we'll move through to provide an overview of the development charge background study and what elements will be contained in the bylaw. And then, as with any other public meeting, questions of council or the public, and then we'll close the public meeting. No decisions will be made this evening. It's only to receive information, which will allow council to further consider the proposal. Next slide, please. As noted, public meeting is mandatory under the Development Charges Act. And there is a mandatory public process which requires us to release the background study and then to a minimum 60-day public process is provided for before council can consider the development charge bylaw. In between those two dates, a public meeting must be held in order to advise the public and for council to receive any information to assist in them considering the bylaw. Next slide. This just at a very high level summarizes the process. We have been meeting with staff in the latter part of last year. We had a council workshop at the beginning of the year, and then we released the background study February 18th. Public meetings this evening, and then council will consider the bylaw on April 19th. As you can see, we've met the minimum 60-day circulation period. Next slide. Development charges are not new to the municipal realm. They've been around now for about 65 years. They originally called lot levies when they were prepared under the Planning Act. And since 1989, we've had a formal Development Charges Act. The costs that we include, the way the Act is set up is that it breaks capital costs into two different components. The first component is what the Act refers to as local services. And those are the very localized costs that developing landowners will pay for 100%. So inside a subdivision, there may be roads, storm drainage, there may be street lights. If you're in an urban setting, there's water and wastewater services which could be provided, et cetera. And once again, those are what the Act says are 100% the developing landowner's costs. Outside of those developments are the broader costs, which is what we consider as part of the development charge. As I say, municipalities since 1989 have been empowered to impose these charges since under the Development Charges Act. And I would note that probably we've seen about 5 or 6 different revisions to the legislation since 1989. However, it continues with very similar elements. Next slide. I've noted there's been more recent changes. So we've gone through, if you recall, Bill 108 was a proposed change to 16 different pieces of legislation. Development charges were one of them. In the early stages, there was significant changes which were considered, but basically were not passed through that piece of legislation. It was through Bill 197 where we saw more depth to the changes which were being made. What was left in Bill 108 really was to provide for delayed payment timing for certain types of developments. So if you have rental housing, if you have an institutional development and nonprofit housing, then you're allowed to pay for over a longer period of time. So the rental housing and institutional development, you can make your payments over 5 years, and then nonprofit housing are allowed to pay the municipality over 20 years. As well, they provided for freezing the development charge rates at the time of site plan application or zoning bylaw amendments. And the charges would be frozen until 2 years after the approval of those developments. So if you built within that 2 year after approval, then you would be allowed the charges to be frozen. Now, each one of these can have interest added to the payments. So it allows for a level of indexing, if you will, of the charges over time to reflect really the cost of, at a minimum, inflation. Bill 138, just initially there was installment payments considered for commercial industrial developments, which the province removed under Bill 138. 197, as I say, did more of the changes to it. It basically reduced the number of services that municipalities can include in the development charge and basically removed a mandatory 10% deduction, which was normally included for the softer services, so parks, recreation, libraries. And then Bill 213 basically just introduced a mandatory exemption for universities, but won't apply in this particular instance. This listing just gives you what now are the eligible services which we can include. I would note that there are, in addition to this, you'll see that we have growth-related studies, and basically those are studies that allow for any one of these individual services to be included. So you see it as a category, but what's been included is maybe master plans or some type of planning documents, which in part deal with policies related to these services. Next slide. The Act is fairly robust. It has over 70 some odd clauses. There's regulations that go with it. And then we have about 160 OMB, OLT cases, which give more depth to more granular direction on a number of different matters. But at very simple, the very simple steps, what it's trying to achieve is to identify the amount, type, and location of growth within the municipality. And that's measured normally over different time horizons. Maybe we'd look at something like parks and recreation over a 10-year planning horizon. Maybe we'd look at fire and roads over a 20-year planning horizon. So within those time horizons, we look at residential growth and non-residential growth in order to look at the potential needs that will arise over those time periods to service the growth. And that's what the second one is: identify the servicing needs and then identify the capital costs associated with those services. When we have the capital costs, there's a number of deductions that we make. And then we're left with number 5, which is a net amount, which can be recoverable under the DC. We must split that cost in between a residential and non-residential benefit. And then basically we divide it back by the growth in order to come up with the appropriate calculations. Next slide. So simply, we look at the cost of the infrastructure over those time horizons. We basically divide it by the growth, and we develop a charge for residential growth, which is provided on low, medium, and high density types of units. So low being single and semi-detached. Medium density would be townhouses, and then high density would be your apartments. And then on the non-residential side, we normally represent that cost on a cost per square foot of building space. So if I have a non-residential charge of $1 and I'm building 5,000 square foot building, I'd be charged $5,000, the 5,000 square feet times $1 per square foot. So that is the way all municipalities in Ontario basically structure their charges. Next slide. There are exemptions. Some of them are mandatory, not a lot, but in certain instances, we may not impose the charge. So if you've got an existing industrial building, you can expand by 50% and not pay the development charge on that 50% expansion. If you go to 75%, then it would only be that increment, that 25% of the 75 that you would pay for. You can, if you have an existing house, you can add up to 2 additional apartments as long as you don't more than double the size of the home. And you can add an additional unit in medium or high density buildings. The local government sector is exempt. So the municipality may not impose on the county or on the school boards. And if they elected to have a charge, they couldn't impose on any buildings that you created. I've noted the exemption for the universities, and then very recently they've added an additional provision where, as of right, if I'm building, say, a single family home, I can add an additional apartment, let's say in the basement, and I don't have to pay for that additional unit. So that's something that's been newly added. The discretionary exemptions are what the municipality may elect to have to make the policies made in, greater Madawaska types of policies. So you can reduce the charge partially or wholly, and you can reduce it, let's say, for only certain types of developments, but not others. So maybe you'd choose to exempt a church, or maybe you'd look to exempt the whole industrial class of development. So those opportunities are there for the council. If the charge is going up, you could considerably, you could look to phase them in over time. And then the last one's just to identify that there's a redevelopment credit. So if I knock down my single family home and replace it within a reasonable time horizon, let's say 5 years, then I wouldn't be charged a development charge. But if I knocked down that house and then 20 years later came back and was looking for a credit, it wouldn't be there. So the Act allows us to set time limits on how long we recognize redevelopment. Next slide. So other than the mandatory exemptions, historically, the municipality's bylaw did not have any other additional exemptions. And we're carrying on with that at this particular point. The draft bylaw has been structured that way. As we move into making these charges, councils always have to consider the balance between growth and the existing residents. Development charges are not mandatory. You do not have to have a development charge bylaw. But if you didn't have a bylaw, as growth occurs, and you needed to expand the fire station, build additional road improvements to accommodate growth, et cetera. If you were continuing to grow and there were costs, then all of the costs would go on to existing taxpayers. So it would go down to the right-hand side and have to be paid for through your property taxes or some of your different types of fees and charges. Alternatively, if you did have the development charge bylaw in place, then you're generating monies which could contribute towards those projects and offset the potential cost burden against the existing taxpayer. So that's what that triangle is meant to provide, is the potential balance that councils seek to make as they're deciding on what the appropriate charges are. The growth forecast was looked at over a 10-year and 15-year period. So over the 10 years, we'd look at just under 400 units, which would provide for growth of a little over 900 people during that period. And over the longer term, about 540 units and almost 1,300 people. The non-residential floor area ranges from about 57,000 square feet up to about 75,000 square feet. Next slide. And looking at the graph from looking at this forecast from a graphic perspective, the black represents historic levels of building, and you can see the average running at about 30 units per year. The forecast is providing for a little bit higher growth. We are seeing enhanced growth within the county, and this graph provides to recognize that. You can see that the low density is that darker blue, the bottom portion of the graph. So those are your singles. Your medium density is in the lighter blue. High density apartments is in the orange. And there is a provision for seasonal units as well, and that's represented in the green. Next slide. The services we've included are services related to a highway, basically roads, fire protection, parks and rec, library, and waste diversion. And the way, when we talked about growth studies, the Act needs us to categorize those studies as a class rather than an individual service. So that's to recognize that the Act actually sets out set services that can be provided for. But if the growth studies cross across a couple of different classes or different types of services, then we call it a class of service. Minor point, at the end of the day, it probably doesn't appear much different to the common reader of the bylaw, but it's a slightly different way we have to do the calculations. Next slide. Currently, your charges are about $3,800 for a single detached unit. You can see the largest component, $2,400, is for transportation, followed by $941 for the fire, and then recreation at $228, and library and studies. On non-residential side, the charge is 25 cents per square foot. Next slide. The charges that we've calculated are a little bit higher. You can see that the single and semi-detached, so moving from the left to the right, the singles are $8,456. Medium density is a little bit lower at $7,270. And then we have three different categories of apartments: large, small apartments, and then a provision for special care, special dwellings, which is to recognize perhaps something along the lines of a retirement home, where you have these very small units, generally with a small occupancy. So we've recognized that through this special category, which isn't in the current bylaw right now. The non-residential charge has been calculated at $5.18 per square foot. Next slide. Looking at a comparison, the original study in 2017 was calculated at $75.22. Council didn't approve the full charge and reduced it, as you can see, down to $38.46. So the new charge that we've calculated is more comparable to the original study last time at the 2017. So a more comparable look would be the 7,500 to the 8,455. That's about a 12% increase over that time horizon, which is basically inflation, or the construction cost index, has actually been a little bit higher than that 12%. So the charges are very similar to what was calculated before. You can see, once again, services related to a highway or roads is the largest component. And as we step down, followed by fire, and then a little bit more of a cost allocation for Parks and Rec, and then correspondingly reduced charges, therefore. Next slide. On the non-residential side, you can see similar type of comparison. The calculated charge was actually at 40 cents, of which 24 cents were approved. Our calculation relates to about $5.18 per square foot. Next slide. Last couple of slides just to give you a comparison of the charges for the most part across the county, but we've also included Ottawa since it's a significant municipality in the area. You can see that there are a couple of, the orange represent some municipalities where the county is imposing a charge. So you can see Mississippi Mills, Carleton Place, and Perth. They have upper tier charges. So you'd pay both for that, and then once again for the local municipality, which is in blue. In Ottawa's case, you can see the red represents education charges. So there's an added charge for the school boards. When we take a look at your charges, you can see you're at the lower end of the scale. The yellow arrow represents where your charge is currently, and the green represents the proposed charges. On the next slide. Commercial is the next chart. You can see once again, comparatively, you're at the right-hand side of the scale, more at the lower end, with your current charge going up to about $5 a square foot as calculated. You can see many other municipalities are at that amount or higher. And then lastly, on the industrial, you can see similar type of comparison. You can see that the number for Ottawa drops down from the prior slide as they provide a different way that they calculate the industrial, producing a lower charge. And you can see at the right-hand side, certain municipalities such as Perth and Mississippi Mills.
If you're answering, we can't hear you. You could be on mute, or did you hear my question? What's that?
I apologize, Chair. Gary's just trying to reconnect right now. He's having a little bit of connection issues.
Okay.
But to answer your question, for the apartments, that is on a per unit basis. So if a building has 10 units within them, and they're 2-bedroom plus, they would each pay the $5,900 for times however many units are in the building.
Okay, that's what I presume. Thank you. And I don't know if we have to wait for him to come back or not, but services related to highway, like what's included there? Is that additional equipment that we would have to purchase, or does it have anything to do with the actual roads themselves?
So through the chair, that would include your roads and related. So you're correct, it is the roads, as well as your public works. So whether it's facilities or any vehicles associated to the provision of that service.
Okay. I was always under the assumption the development charges went for additions to. So if we had 4 plow trucks and we needed a 5th, or we needed to go to a higher standard of truck, the development charges could be applied to that. So if we have a township road going through the community, and it needed to be repaved, are you suggesting that development charges would be used to pay for the repaving of that road?
Through the chair, that is not what the development charge would be used for. It would only be for expansionary works. So if you were to perhaps, with that same example, if you were to expand that road perhaps to a 2-lane to maybe a 3-lane, so you're having a turning lane, or maybe expanding it to add a 4th lane so that it's 2 to 4, the expansionary costs would be included in the development charge, but not the repaving of the existing road.
Okay, so it is additional, so it's been explained to us before. So if we were doing, for example, we're doing Ferguson Lake Road right now, and we're doing Hardened Shoulders, the 2 lanes of Ferguson Lake Road would fall under the regular tax levy, but the Hardened Shoulders, which is new, could be coming out of development charges.
Richard, yes, if it is new, then that would be something that could be considered, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And what about upgrades though? Because obviously with increased development comes increased usage of an existing roadway. And if the existing roadway was, was chip and tar because there was no need for anything better than that due to the low volume of traffic, but then increased development increases the amount of travel, and the decision was made to upgrade that to a paved surface. Would that qualify?
Through the chair, yes, it would. Essentially, when we look at expansionary, it's not just adding the additional lanes, but it's also the capacity that the road could handle, or the capacity of any service at all. So through your example, if it's gravel or tar and chip, which allows for only a certain amount of traffic, per hour. But, if you upgraded, let's say, to a full-on asphalt, or, something that allow more traffic because there's development, in the neighborhood that's requiring this increased level of service, then that incremental cost could be included as part of the DC.
Thank you. I guess my last point is you have upper tier charges and educational development charges, and I know that doesn't pertain to the development charge study that we're looking at right now, but just out of curiosity, if the education decide to put a development charge, can they pick that by specific? Would they have to go county-wide, or could they pick that they're doing it by a municipality? I presume it would be county-wide. Is that correct?
Through the chair, with education and development charges, they operate under a different legislation. So typically, if they are to include a DC, they would do it for anywhere the school board is located. So in your case, if you have the same school board throughout the county, then it would be within that. It would be what they would include.
And if they decided to implement a development charge, does the lower tier municipality have any say in that?
Through the chair, you are the collectors of their development charges, and that is it.
Okay. Now, is that the same to fall through for the upper tier charges?
That is correct. If the upper tier were to implement a DC, you would have to collect on their behalf.
For the upper tier, and we're going through this at the county now because of the enormous growth that we're seeing in some of the areas of the county, where, for example, in Petawawa, they need the County Road 51 going to the base perhaps to be a 4-lane highway, and that's to the tune maybe of $25 million, and the county is wondering how they're going to pay for that. If they put on a development charge, could that be lower tier municipality? So if it was in Petawawa, that it would be the city would pay for it, or would that be county-wide?
Through the chair, they would have the opportunity to undertake a DC study to determine how they would like to implement the charge. As per the Development Charges Act, they have the opportunity to implement it whether on a county-wide basis, or if they so choose, they can apply an area rating, at which point it would only affect the municipalities they'd like to apply it to. but that would be on their discretion.
Okay. So they could pick an area just the same as if we had a sewer line going to the east end of the village, you could put a development charge on for that area, but not for the rest of the township. So they
If you
would follow.
decide to move that way, then you have the ability to do so.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Uh, Yeah. Well, anything further with Watson before we move to the next presentation? Okay, thank you. And next we have Paul Murphy. You can go ahead, Paul.
Sorry, Paul, I believe you're muted. Oh, we can't hear you.
Sure, it's 6:05. We'll take 10 minutes, and Sean, can you work with Paul on that? Okay, welcome back to the meeting. We, I believe, have our audio connections rectified. So I'll once again turn it over to Mr. Paul Murphy. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before I know I'm down slotted to make a brief presentation to council regarding my thoughts, but may I, as a member of the public, ask some questions of Watson, of the Watson report before I begin my presentation?
Certainly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Tan, thanks for bringing up this slide. When we look at these bars left to right, one would get the impression that the development charge for Greater Madawaska is quite small in relationship to many of these communities to the left. But I really wonder if that's a fair way to look at it, because is it not true that all of the communities to the left of the green bar are communities that have central water and wastewater and fire suppression systems? Because their district or their development charges collect for those as well, don't they?
Through the chair, many of them are, yes, they are. They do have water and wastewater.
Yeah, I with respect, I don't think it's many, I think it's all. Just let's have a look at them here. So if you were to redo these bars and eliminate the services that these cities provide, that Greater Madawaska doesn't provide, what would the graph look like then?
We can provide that information to council.
I think that would be very helpful from my perspective, because council would then be able to see on a true apples to apples basis. In fact, I think the real comparables for council and our township are similarly situated townships in Renfrew County and perhaps elsewhere that do not offer central services. I think it's a big point. Mr. Scanlon, about the biggest component, as you mentioned, of the development charge relates to roads. And when you look at the road calculations, the capital costs were about $7.2 million. And after grants that the township has been able to get of about 4.4 million, there's about 2.7 million of capital costs that are uncovered. And in your analysis, you've attributed about $833,000 of benefit to existing ratepayers, and you have allocated 69% of the costs to new residents under the development charges. Can you tell us how you came to the conclusion that that allocation was a fair one?
Well, generally, we take a look at where the development's occurring and then take a look at the types of improvements that staff are recommending for that. And generally, it's an attribution based on, considering the amount of increased traffic and what's needed to accommodate that traffic.
Thank you. Are you familiar with where the new development traffic is coming from as it comes into the into Greater Madawaska? Do you believe it's going across these three roads, which are the Ferguson Lake Road, the Flat Road, and the Madawaska Road?
Yeah, I don't have the maps in front of me, but when we were going through our discussions with staff, yes.
Okay, thank you. The next question relates to your growth rate. The growth rate's very important because if it's too high, not enough money is collected. If it's too low, too much money is collected. Would you agree?
Not necessarily. I mean, the growth forecast is the starting point, which assists us in taking a look at servicing needs. If the growth is faster than what we've anticipated, then potentially we would need to, when we hit the end of it, let's say the 15 years worth of forecast we're built in 10 years, then we'd be looking at the further projections and assessing what servicing needs are required. If it's slower, then correspondingly, we may not need to build it as quickly and we won't have the funding. So there is a relationship between the timing of the works and the growth. And keep in mind that the Development Charges Act require us to come back and revisit the growth forecast and the servicing needs every 5 years. So there's since we're going out as far as 15 years, that would be a review now, a review 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and 15 years from now.
And when you calculated the township's growth forecast, did you take into account subdivision applications and site plan applications that are pending right now in your analysis?
Yes, if you go into the appendix A to the forecast, we identify the growth that's coming through the development process.
Thank you. And did you have an opportunity to talk to any of the regional builders in the community who are talking to people that plan to build in the community that have not township's door?
No, we've talked to municipal staff with respect to planning matters and developments that are known to be coming through the process, and we've based our information on that. But no, we did not sit down with individual developers.
Okay, and I'm just wondering if you considered the growth forecast that the council has been presented in another report that was prepared by Performance Concepts Consulting. They prepared a very detailed modernization report, and the indication of growth in that report is significantly higher than what's in the development study. I'm wondering if you're able to reconcile that at all.
I think it's noted in the analysis. Our demographic team had reviewed that information. I think there was a couple of different scenarios that were provided, and in conjunction with staff, we took the forecast that we've presented here.
Okay. I would like to turn to the development that I'm personally associated with, which is Calabogie Peaks. It's the only master planned community in our township. And as a result of it being a master planned community, it has potential to be treated as an area. And it also brings benefits to the existing community that other developments don't. I'm wondering if you and your team looked at any of those during your analysis.
I'm not understanding the question. It's very vague. Did you look at all of this stuff? I don't understand what that means.
All right, well, I'll break it down then. The first part of it, an area rating. Your report indicates that you did not recommend any area ratings for the township. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Did you look at the uniqueness of Calabogie Peaks and the different levels of services on the master plan site compared to the rest of the township?
No.
Okay, thank you. When you looked at the issue of the possibility of a reduction for benefits that a development brings to the community, did you consider the benefits that Calabogie Peaks' unique infrastructure brings to the community?
Well, maybe you can advise me of what the unique services that are being provided to the municipality.
Well, I'll get to that in my summation, sir. It's your report. I'm just asking you if you looked at it or not.
Well, it's a very vague question, so it's very open-ended. So it's difficult to have an answer to something that has an open-ended question like that. So it could mean different.
I'd be happy to be more. Let me be more specific. Did you take into account the responsibility agreement between Calabogie Peaks and the township for water and wastewater services?
We're not providing water and wastewater. So what of that agreement, what am I to consider?
Well, it has a couple of components to it that can offer significant benefits to the community. One, the township has requested that the development have a fire suppression system, which is just like you would see in a city. We're working on that design. It's a very expensive piece of infrastructure. That fire suppression system can provide significant benefits to the township by providing fast fill, quick fills for fire trucks that would increase the serviceability and time and reduce the time to get to fire sites on the west side of Calabogie Lake. That's a benefit that's quite unique. Did that get taken into account?
Well, that's the requirements for the fire suppression is based on the individual development that you're advancing, and I would perceive that the benefit would only be in the realm that they may not have to back up the response with a tanker truck. That's, there's many municipalities that have a blend of both urban and rural, and some of the development requires a tanker truck to respond, and others don't. But with respect to individual more dense developments, there may be additional requirements to service that. So there's differences on both. Because you're providing the fire suppression, I'm assuming that there's higher densities and there's a requirement for that additional enhanced fire suppression requirements.
Yes, I guess my simple point is this. With a fire suppression system in place, the township has a tremendous asset that can help and benefit people that do not live on the resort site, because they're benefiting from a very fast, quick connect that they would not otherwise have. So we'll leave it at that. I wondered
that's a matter of perspective. So
I guess that's fair enough, but it was not considered in your report, I take it.
It wasn't, well, in our discussions with the fire chief, it wasn't something that was brought up to us as being pertinent.
In the area of wastewater, you wanted me to be specific. In the area of wastewater, the resort is planning to put in a mechanical wastewater system. That wastewater system can take deliveries from honey trucks that are servicing the community. And if the honey trucks can use that system at the resort site, it will reduce the costs for community residents to have their septic systems pumped, because right now the honey trucks have to travel 30 plus kilometers away to dump. I wondered if that benefit had been taken into account.
No, because that's, if there's something with respect to the private servicing and to individual haulers within the existing community, then that's something that may be a perceived benefit. I'm not quite sure whether there's a contract with the municipality, whether it's something that potentially might offer, but we have no information on what the corresponding fees or how much, whether it services everyone or only a small amount. I am fairly familiar with mechanical systems and with the additional costs associated with treating, denser septage. So I'd be interested in knowing that you're enhancing that treatment plant to deal with higher density septage. I know there's a significantly higher cost, so I'm not aware that this was potentially being offered, and that it's a direct benefit to all the haulers and all the residents in the municipality.
Thank you. And then my last question is, your report does not identify the policy decision that was made by council in 2017 to not impose development charges on multifamily buildings. Is there a reason why you didn't identify that as a policy change that you're recommending in this report?
In this particular report, we're calculating in conjunction with staff identifying needs, what the cost would be for all different types of developments. As I've noted, there's a provision in there for discretionary exemptions. So that's something for councils to consider every time we have individual bylaws. So if council, in their wisdom, want to take a look at reductions, phasing in exemptions, that's within their privilege between now and adoption of the bylaw.
Thank you. Could I ask you to pull up the slide, please, sir, that shows the 320/4086 charge, and you compare it to, I think, what's being proposed this year? I just want to bring something to everyone's attention. I think it's important because some of the council members were not part of council when this was looked at 5 years ago, and they may not even be aware of this change. There we go. So the current council approved, that really is not a complete disclosure of what council approved. That charge that council approved in 2017 relates to single family housing, as I recall, but it does not relate to multifamily or apartments. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's based on a single family home.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that the council members that weren't around in 2017 were aware of that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That concludes my my questions.
Okay, thank you. And would you like to move forward with your comments or presentation now?
Thank you. I will, yes, and I'll keep it brief. I'm speaking on behalf of Calabogie Peaks and all of our stakeholders. We think that there's 6 main issues with this report. The proposed increase is shocking. It's very, very high. It's over 200%. The allocation of road costs to new residents compared to existing residents, I don't think there's any factual basis for it at all. The growth rate, I think, talking to builders and looking at what was in the report that was done by Performance Concepts, this growth assumption is extremely low, and that causes the township to over recover when more people build than is projected. The report missed a really unfortunately missed a win-win opportunity to look at the uniqueness of Calabogie Peaks development and the benefits that it can bring to the community. Finally, I think the report should have made it clear that the township's policy had been to not put development charges on attached dwellings, and we just got that cleaned up there in that Q&A. On these points, there seems to be a pattern here where these DC studies shoot for the moon, and then they toss the football into council's lap to make a decision. So in 2017, the recommendation was to go to $7,500. Council came in at $3,400. The same thing is happening again this year. And so I guess if we all understand the context of what this has done, it appears that the policy behind the report is simply to shoot for the moon and then let council decide what they feel is actually fair. It's kind of an interesting way to work. On the road matter, 54% of the development charge relates to roads. So it's the biggest issue. And as I pointed out, there's a 69-31 allocation here. And I really didn't understand the answer relating to how we got to the 31-69. These roads are great to have, these improvements, but I think it's obvious from road usage that new residents don't use the roads that are being upgraded all that much. Yes, they do use them. I'm not arguing they don't, but all of our new residents are coming in mostly by way of Calabogie Road and Highway 511. And in fact, if you look at the Performance Concept Consulting Group's report, they actually say this. They actually say that the potential for economic development through growth will, by virtue of the 417 expansion, be directed to the east side of Greater Madawaska. So we have a very completely different perspective here between the DC study and what you've previously been told. And I think what we all see as residents of the community. So trying to foist 69% of those road costs onto new residents is, I don't think is fair, and at least not even close to being fair in terms of where traffic volumes are. The growth rate we talked about, the growth rate is very, very low. 39 houses, 37, 33 in sequences a year. That's compared to 69 building permits for new homes last year. We all know the development of the pipeline. I didn't see anything in the report, but there's the Guzman subdivision, 45 lots. There's the Robert Dick subdivision, 60 lots. There's the Calabogie Peak site plan application, 98 townhomes. Right in those alone are 208 units. I think the growth forecast is very conservative. We also know that there's a tremendous surge in movement out of urban areas and into rural areas, particularly Greater Madawaska is seeing that as well. There's no account for that in this report. There's no detail behind how we got to these numbers. I think they're quite conservative. And again, the consequence of that is that the township will over-collect development money, have it sitting in a reserve fund, and that doesn't seem to be a fair way to go. I'm gonna send you a letter summarizing my comments, so I don't hold you up too much tonight. But there's so many unique things about Calabogie Peaks' development that could be exploited for the benefit of the community, and none of these are captured in the development charge analysis. So I'm going to lay them out in writing, and these are just a start. There's many more to come. The point is simply this: if Calabogie Peaks overinvests to provide benefits to the community, such as the fire suppression, such as the honey trucks, we want a cooperative environment in which those contributions are recognized and encouraged and treated fairly. And we won't be able to get there unless the people that are responsible for thinking about development charges open up their minds to see what's in front of us and to explore everything that's possible. We certainly want to do that, and we would invite council or whoever they would designate to join us. And then finally, I think this council's policy in 2017 not to put development charges on attached dwelling units was a great policy. We have a tremendous lack of affordable housing in our community. That's a well-known fact among all of us. The only way we're going to get affordable housing is to encourage people to come in and build multifamily. It won't happen in any other way. Yes, we have lots of beautiful Airbnbs available, but those are expensive places for people to stay, and they're built by people that are building mostly second homes. We are not so far be able to attract people that build reasonably priced housing to provide them, affordable housing. And townhomes are the only way to get there. So if we tag development charges onto townhomes, we're going to increase the barrier to entry and make it more difficult for someone to come in and fill that important need for us. So I think there's a business case to be made to stick with the policy. The other thing I would point out is that multifamily applications, development applications, are infinitely more complicated and more costly than subdivision applications. I'm experiencing that right now with the development application that Calabogie Peaks has in for 98 townhomes. The numbers of studies, the costs involved, the infrastructure such as fire suppression, they're huge. So if we want to encourage that type of development and densification, we need to recognize that something's got to give. For example, if the development charges that are proposed by the Watson report were to be placed on the 98 townhomes, those townhomes are paying an additional just short of $1 million of tax. Do we really think that's right? I have to put that number into the townhome price. I'm not selling a raw lot, I'm selling a curated product. I'm facing another $1.5 million with fire suppression. At what point do we say, hey, let's get people out and working and making things happen in the township? So development charges, in my view, in many cases can be a terrible, terrible impediment to growth. What the report didn't address is that many townships choose not to use development charges at various times to promote growth. Tom Sullivan, when he was the mayor of Arnprior in the 1980s, did this. It was a tremendous success. There's a big difference between a one-time development charge and the annuity of a new taxpayer, because that new taxpayer is a gift that keeps on giving every day of the year for many years. So if you do a present value analysis of a development charge compared to what the value of a future annuity of one taxpayer is, it's the taxpayer is 20 times more valuable than the annuity. So I just think some of these short-term versus long-term objectives should be kept in mind when we weigh what we want to do with development charges. That completes my remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll open the floor up to questions of Mr. Murphy if there are any from council. I have a couple. So Paul, when you referred to Schedule 70, were you requesting that Watson redo that schedule so to take into effect where there is sewer and water and pull that portion out, or were you looking for them to do something there?
I think, Brian, it's really your decision. I know that that slide is terribly misleading. I've done the analysis myself, and I must say, I'm really surprised it was presented to you the way it was. If you take out all of the services that those towns don't provide, or that provide that you don't, you're going to see a completely different picture. And, you know, I've been in the consulting business. I get fired for doing things like that. So I must tell you, I was quite offended to see that set up in the way it was. And if anybody was misled by it, then I hope I was able to clear the air, if you will.
Okay, when I look at that schedule, you know, even you take the city of Ottawa, I know there's sewer and water, but if you get out to as the West End, as you're moving towards Arnprior, and I have a friend that's building right now around the Panmure Road area with a cell and with a well and septic, but I think the development charges aren't any different than they are in the city, if I understand correctly, because they told me they were paying up somewhere around $39,000 in development fee out there in the country. So I think the majority of those ones to the left have a mix of both, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. I don't believe that's the case. But you know, I'll leave it to you. I mean, okay. Yeah, if your description of one person in that area of Ottawa is true, we have to look at the total population, right? So the total population paying those development charges, there wouldn't be many people, I don't think, in the rural areas of Ottawa that are paying high development charges that don't have the basic Ottawa services. No doubt there are some, but I don't think it's a large number.
Okay, we'll look at that. The other point that you had made was about Calabogie Peaks over-investing to service the community. Will the Peaks be investing because that is what is dictated by the rules of what you're trying to build? And I'll use fire suppression as an example. So you're doing the fire suppression to satisfy the rules that are put forth to you in what you have to build. So I'm just question whether you're doing that for the community or are you doing it because that's what's necessary to get the buildings that you want.
It's necessary for the type of development that we are proposing. No question about it. But, and this is the important but, we can extend that investment to deliver unique and one-time benefits to the community. We don't have to, but we can. And I think if we engage in a what if thought through, we're going to find there's some amazing things that we can do. You know, if you take a water buffalo truck from the fire department and it's pumping, you know, from the lake, it's going to take a long time to get full. A fast charge out of our fire suppression system, bang, can get that truck done in probably about a minute. We can station trucks at the resort so that they can go right to fires. There's so many things we can do. The honey truck is another example. And, you know, there's other examples that we can develop as well.
Okay. So those certainly sound like beneficial items, you know, that we'll be able to meet, but I can certainly understand how they would not be part of this report because they're not something that are actually there today. And so I don't think any consultant would have them as part of it because, to be quite honest, I don't think the most of us knew that either, that was part of your thinking.
Pardon me, if you'll excuse me for a second. I put a question in the chat that hasn't been answered. When you ask for questions, I thought that would come up. But my question is, if the township is planning to add water, wastewater, and fire suppression systems to Calabogie, shouldn't there be development charges for that? And then shouldn't a development that is contributing to that be exempt, or at least have some reduction in development charges? It could go as well for parks. I know the Peaks has a nice beach that people pay. It's for their patrons, but the Peaks itself, the resort, but that's potentially a public space, a second beach. When with growth, Barrett, the Barnett Park. So if they're doing these things, shouldn't it be, first of all, counted as something we're doing? And then secondly, be given $1 million is not small change. And also on the other matter that Paul mentioned was the multi-unit. We want to encourage multi-unit, compact, walkable trails, areas. So the council does have it at its discretion, from what I've understood so far, to be able to say, let's reduce that. That's one of the, if I'm correct, Gary, it's one of the things they have discretion to say, we want multi-unit and we want rental, etc. 2 questions.
Okay, well, I guess, pardon me? I can't hear you. Okay, go ahead. Gary, would you like to respond to that?
So can we repeat the question? I think the first one was, if they're building some recreational services, should they get some reduction? If the first one, and I think the second one is just you want to encourage medium density development, and if that's I'll answer that one first. If that's the case for council, then certainly you can reduce the charges, not impose a charge, but that becomes a revenue loss to the municipality. So that's a choice. That's a balance you have to make. That triangle is, if you choose not to impose it on certain classes of development or certain types of development, that's within your abilities. However, what you exempt, then you'll just have to provide the missing funds when you're doing your capital budget every year. So you have to assess the impacts of the lost revenue. With respect to recreation, I think there was a question on recreation.
No, I did put a whole lot of questions all into one. That if the township is planning, as it seems to be, to consider wastewater, water, and fire suppression as Calabogie grows, then shouldn't it be in the development charges at least a consideration? And if that's what they're doing, then when you have a developer who is contributing to all of that, shouldn't they get a reduction or an elimination of that part of the charge?
Perhaps I'll respond to that. So we are not looking at putting in water, wastewater. What Paul was referring to is the township entered into a municipal responsibility agreement with Calabogie Peaks, where they are doing their own water, wastewater, we had to enter into an agreement because the people that are going to be buying in the subdivisions in Calabogie Peaks, if for some reason Calabogie Peaks failed to provide the water, wastewater, there had to be a government agency or someone to fall back to ensure that there would be water and wastewater for these people. So the municipal responsibility agreement that we entered in, and the Calabogie Peaks puts, dollars with us to hold as a safeguard that we're able to provide that service if they fail to provide it. So it's not that we as a township are looking at water or wastewater. And I think to your second point about a multi-level or multi-residential units and so on, we have the study from Watson, as we had a study from another consultant the last time. Once council took that, they worked with it. And as Mr. Murphy stated, there was a decision made not to charge development fees on certain units to try and enhance the growth of that within the community. So that's, there's been no decisions. All this is a presentation of the study that was put together by the Watson Group. And then council will take that away and do further deliberations. I believe Mr. Murphy said that he will be sending a letter both to Watson and to council with his thoughts and suggestions on it, which we will take into account, and it'll go under further discussions, and we'll be getting further information and recommendations from the staff of the township.
That's right, but isn't this the sort of feedback you're looking for that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, anything further? Okay, seeing nothing. So we'll move then. Is there any, I'll just ensure that there's no further questions from any other members of the public that have joined us tonight. And seeing none, thank you. And to Paul and Mr. Murphy and to Watson's, thank you for the presentations. And we'll move on with the council meeting. Moved by Councillor Frost, seconded by Councillor Perrier. Be it resolved that the following bylaw, 21-2022 confirmatory, be deemed read a first, second, and final time and passed by council at the special council meeting held April 4th, 2022. All in favor? Carried. Moved by Councillor Frost, seconded by Councillor Perrier. Be it resolved that the special council meeting of April 4th, 2022 be adjourned at 6:52 p.m. All in favor? Carried. Thank you, everyone.